Blade Runner was released in 1982, is directed by Ridley Scott, and is based off of the Philip K. Dick novel Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep? Now, if you hadn't already noticed, I'm reviewing this movie because its sequel, Blade Runner 2049, is just round the corner. So I thought this is a better time than any to talk about the original, and I'm kind of glad I'm talking about the original because I have some interesting thoughts of my own to bring to the table when it comes to Blade Runner, because when I first saw it several years ago, I wasn't that keen on it. But now that I've rewatched it again for this review, I can wholeheartedly say that I do really like it. First of all, this movie looks amazing. Everything from a visual standpoint is incredible. Whether it's the cinematography or the effects on show, everything looks amazing. And that's pretty impressive, seeing that this came out about 35 years ago. And seeing that a film from 1982 still holds up incredibly well to this day in terms of its visuals is impressive in itself. And I mean, I cannot recommend this enough. Watch this movie on Blu-ray, because having that extra high-def aspect to it really makes every colour and every single shot just pop that little bit more. So if you are going to check out this movie, I highly recommend you do it in as high definition as possible, because despite how old it is, the high definition really does enhance your experience in terms of the visuals of the movie. Also, whilst we're on the topic of visuals, I might as well mention that there is a certain atmosphere that this movie gives off that is clear from the very, very start, and this is mostly down to the cinematography, like I said, and the amazing score by Vangelis, which is easily one of the best scores ever made for a movie. It's beautiful, but also kind of a little bit haunting at the same time, and that's pretty much the entire atmosphere of the movie summed up in one. You have these amazing, awe-inspiring visuals that are stunning to look at, but there's something kind of sinister and a little bit moody and dark under the surface, which is pretty much the entire tone of the movie. One thing I love about Blade Runner is the fact that even though it very clearly looks like a sci-fi movie, it actually plays out more like a film noir. Everything from the shot compositions to the way the characters interact with each other, just everything kind of fits perfectly like a crime detective film. And I absolutely love that about this movie. It kind of warps your expectations a little. You go in expecting a sci-fi movie, but instead you get this slowly paced and methodical crime drama that has some really interesting characters with it. And whilst we're talking about the people in this movie, the acting is pretty good from everyone. Harrison Ford is really good as Rick Deckard. It's an iconic role that he's kind of made his own, even though there are a couple of moments where he is a little bit iffy, but I can completely understand that, and I don't think it's his fault personally. And I think it's more down to Ridley Scott, because apparently during filming, Ridley Scott was so focused on getting the visuals just right that he barely had any time set aside to really tell Harrison what he should be doing in certain scenes, or how he should be acting, or how Rick Deckard should be reacting to certain things. And I can kind of understand it in that sense, because Harrison kind of had to make up all these emotions on the spot and kind of react as if he didn't really have a script. He obviously had a script, but, you know, he was kind of making up what he was doing a lot of the time. So I can kind of understand why at times it can be a little bit iffy, but for the most part, he really does encapsulate the character of Rick Deckard, and he does a really good job. Another highlight for me is Rutger Hauer as Roy Batty, the leader of the small group of replicants that Rick Deckard is after. I thought he's really good. He's not in it much at the start, but when he gets towards the end of the movie, he really does have some scenes that make him shine, especially towards the end with that iconic "memories are like teardrops being lost in the rain." I love that moment, and he really does as best a job as possible with that character. And the same goes for all the other people playing replicants like Daryl Hannah and the others, etc. They do a really good job of the characters they are given. Now, Blade Runner isn't a perfect movie. I do think it has problems. And the first of those problems for me is that it is a little too slow at times. I mean, the first time I saw this movie, the slow pace was the main thing that kind of bored me, and I just wanted things to be happening a lot sooner. And that's something that the pacing does a lot in this movie. The first half of the movie is really slow, and there are some really interesting dialogue scenes, and I have nothing against what is happening in the first half of the movie. It is really interesting. But the movie doesn't really get going until the last act or so. And when that stuff happens, it is really good. But I just wish they could have kicked everything else into gear a little bit sooner, thus making it a little bit more entertaining in the long run. I just think it takes a little bit too long for stuff to actually, kick into gear. So yeah, that's one gripe I've kind of had since the very first time I saw it. The other problem I have with this movie isn't really to do with the movie per se, but more to do with how you go into this movie when watching it. Because when I first saw it, I was expecting it to be like The Terminator or Star Wars, a fun action sci-fi adventure movie that had some really cool action in it. But that's not what you get. Instead, like I mentioned before, it's a very slowly paced, methodical crime drama that does play out a lot more like a noir than a sci-fi movie. And you really have to be patient with it. And this leads into my aforementioned problem, whereby the actual action in the movie, what little there is of it, doesn't really kick in until the final act or so. So if you go into it expecting a full-on adventure action sci-fi movie, you will be thoroughly disappointed, because the action doesn't happen till the end, and that's not really the point of the movie anyway. It's just there as an extra thing that happens to be pretty good as well. Also, whilst I'm here, I might as well give my own interpretation of the one question that every person who's seen this movie has asked, and that is Deckard a replicant? Now, what I'm about to say could be considered spoilers, so spoiler alert. So if you don't want to know what this is, skip ahead a little bit, but anyway, I think he is a replicant, and I have always thought that since I first saw the movie. And the fact that Ridley Scott has confirmed this recently just kind of proves my point. Now, there are theories going around, like the whole unicorn thing, kind of proving that he's a replicant, and I completely understand that. But there was something I noticed when watching it for a second time for this review that I never noticed the first time. And it just kind of cements the whole replicant idea. And this theory that I have is very simple. Eyes. There are a lot of eyes in this movie, like in terms of the visuals and in terms of how they focus on them. I mean, hell, one of the first shots of the movie is an eye. And where I'm trying to get at with this is very simple. There are quite a few shots in the movie of people with glowing eyes. And all the characters that have glowing eyes are replicants. For example, there's a shot of Pris and Roy Batty sitting together, and their eyes are glowing in the dark. They're replicants. There is a shot of Rachel, and her eyes are glowing, and that is just before we find out she is a replicant. And you can kind of tell that they're all replicants because you either already know they're replicants or you later find out they are replicants. So when you rewatch the movie, you can find out that every replicant has glowing eyes when they walk into a dark room. There is one moment where Rachel is talking to Rick, and Rick walks behind her and his eyes glow for like a second, like a split second. And it's that alone that makes me wonder whether he's a replicant or not. And it just kind of cemented, once I saw that, I was like, he's a replicant. The only people with glowing eyes in this movie are replicants, including the owl, which is very obviously not real. So I just thought, he's a replicant, he's got glowing eyes. I mean, it's probably obvious to some of you if you've seen the movie, and if you already figured that out, good for you, but I just thought I'd put my own two penneth worth in, because once I noticed that in the movie, I just could not stop thinking about it, and I kind of had to mention it. Anyway, I really like Blade Runner, and I'm going to give it a 9 out of 10. If you haven't seen this movie, I highly recommend you watch it. It's definitely one of those films you must watch at least once in your life. It's got some groundbreaking visuals that still hold up to this day, with some pretty good performances. But the slow pacing can put some people off. I mean, hell, it did the first time I saw it. But now I've learnt to kind of love it. So guys, that was my review of Blade Runner. I hope you enjoyed it. If you enjoyed the video, then give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Bye.